Have you ever seen someone so broken, yet somehow still standing? In the blistering summer of 1868, a quiet rancher walked into town for rope and flour and found a young Apache woman locked in an iron cage, bruised, bound, sold like cattle for $5. He could have walked away, but he didn't. He stepped forward, not as a hero, not with promises, just with silence and a choice. What would you have done? Would you have bought her freedom? Would you have stayed silent or worse? Looked away. This is not a story about saving. It is about seeing. It is about choosing someone again and again, even when the world says you shouldn't. So, pull up a chair and listen close, because some stories do not start with love, but with one man saying, I see you. The sun over Dead River, Arizona, was not shining. It was burning. July of 1868 came like fire. The air shimmered above the dry ground, and the dirt cracked beneath every step. Dust hung in the sky like a second skin. There was no wind, no mercy, just heat and silence and the smell of sweat and horses. People gathered outside the old grain warehouse on the edge of town. Men in leather vests. Women with jawlines sharp from too many winters. Boys who wore guns too loose and pride too tight. They were waiting for something different today. Inside that warehouse, the floorboards moaned under shifting boots. The windows had been boarded years ago, but light found its way in through the cracks. It painted lines across a rusted iron cage at the center of the room. Inside the cage sat a girl. She was young, maybe 25, Apache, by the look of her skin and the way she held her chin high. Her hair was tangled with ash and blood. Her hands were bound at the wrists. One cheek had swollen purple, and a fly circled the crusted cut on her temple. She did not move. Not when the crowd shifted. Not when the auctioneer cleared his throat. Not even when the first man said, $3. The auctioneer's voice echoed off the walls. 3.5 do I hear 4. Nobody laughed yet, not yet. There was still the strange silence of curiosity, but it would not last. Outside, standing near the general store, Jesse Calder paused. He held a small sack of flour in one hand and a loop of rope in the other. He had not planned to stop, but the sound in the air made him still. Not the voice of the auctioneer, but the silence that followed. It was the kind of quiet Jesse knew too well, the kind that comes before a man does something he cannot take back. He walked across the street, slow, steady, spurs clicking like metronomes for judgment. He pushed open the warehouse door and saw her. Ayasha. Her name was not known then, not yet. To the crowd, she was just the savage girl from the eastern hills, caught in a skirmish outside Camp Mercy, sold now like cattle. $4. The voice rang sharp. Sweat trickled down Jesse's back. He looked at her, and she looked back. Only for a second, but in that second, there was no fear. Only fire. Jesse did not blink. He dropped the rope at his feet, set down the flour, reached into the inside pocket of his duster. $5 silver, his last. The auctioneer raised an eyebrow. Do I hear more? No answer. Sold. The key was handed to a deputy with a grin too wide. The crowd murmured. Some shook their heads. Others laughed. Jesse walked forward. Kneeling, he did not touch the cage, did not speak right away. He simply laid his coat across the bars, shielding her from the sun that poured through the broken ceiling. Then, in a voice, quieter than the dust, he said, My name is Jesse. I am not here to hurt you. She said nothing, but when the cage door opened, she did not run. And when he stood and walked toward the horse, waiting under the cottonwood, her footsteps followed, not loud, not quick, but steady. The people of Dead River watched. Some scoffed. Some spit. No one stopped him. No one tried. Out past the edge of town, near a dry creek bed, Jesse finally turned. She stood there. Just stood. Still watching. "You can go if you want," he said. Again. She said nothing. Instead, she climbed onto the horse behind him. No help needed. No words given. They rode east, away from the town where her name had never been spoken, and his had long been forgotten. But neither looked back. Not once. Long before he was the man who placed $5 silver on a dusty warehouse floor, Jesse Calder had already lost everything. His ranch sat just north of the Gila Ridge. Rough land, rocky, dry most years, but rich in grass when the rains came right. Jesse had inherited it from his father and his father before that. 3 generations of Calder men had bled into that dirt, but Jesse did not have anyone to pass it to. 10 years earlier, cholera swept through the settlements like a whispering death. It took his wife, Anna, in 3 days. It took their son, Caleb, in 1 night. After that, Jesse stopped marking birthdays. He stopped praying. He stopped answering letters. What he did not stop doing was working. He woke before the sun, fed the stock, patched the fences, watched the skies, waited for rain. Not because he believed anything would change, but because something in him refused to let the place go. Neighbors called him a ghost. He went to town once a month, bought supplies, never lingered, never drank. He nodded to the clerk, paid exact change, rode back alone. People whispered. They said he had gone soft or mad, or both. That he still talked to his wife under the cottonwood tree where he buried her. That he kept the boys' boots by the door. Some of that was true. Jesse did not talk much, but he listened. To the wind, to the way the earth cracked when it needed water, to the sounds a sick animal made before it lay down for the last time. And maybe that was why he heard her. The girl in the cage, Ayasha. Something in the silence that wrapped around her was too familiar, too sharp. It was not fear. It was the sound of someone who had made peace with dying. He had heard it before, in the war, in the eyes of men too young to bleed. But in Ayasha, there was something else. Something that refused to die. Even in chains, it called to something in Jesse he had buried years ago. A man who used to believe in right and wrong. A man who once carried a Bible and a badge. A man who had not always lived in shadows. As they rode east that day, Jesse did not speak. Neither did she. But he noticed things. The way she scanned the horizon like a scout. The way she sat straight despite the bruises. The way her fingers never rested. When they reached the edge of the dry arroyo, he handed her the canteen. She took it, did not drink right away. Smelled it first, checked the seal. Then, finally, brought it to her lips. That small moment told him everything. She was not broken. She was watching, just like he was. That night, under a sky full of nothing, Jesse built a small fire behind the shelter of a boulder. He gave her space, laid his bedroll far enough away to show trust, but close enough to protect her if needed. He watched the flames. He did not sleep. When the fire burned low, she spoke, not a name, not a story, just one question. Why Jesse looked up. His voice was low, not gentle, just true. Because I could. She nodded once. Nothing more was said, but in that pause, in that silence, something shifted. It was not trust, not yet, but it was no longer war. And Jesse Calder, the man Dead River had forgotten, felt something stir in his chest. Not love, not hope, just the memory of being seen. The warehouse was quiet, too quiet. It was not the kind of silence that calmed a man. It was the kind that held its breath. Like the world was waiting for someone to do something wrong. Jesse Calder stepped inside. The smell hit first. Damp wood, stale sweat, old fear. Light pushed in through the broken ceiling. It caught the dust in the air and turned it gold. And there she was, sitting inside a rusted iron cage, not slumped, not curled, but straight-backed. Still, her skin was bruised, her wrists were bound, blood darkened her temple. A fly landed near her eye. She did not blink. Jesse stopped moving. Around him, the crowd pressed closer, some curious, some cruel. A voice rang out, $4. A few chuckles followed. Someone muttered, "Too much for a wild dog." Jesse did not react. He looked at the girl. She looked back, just once, but long enough. There was no pleading in her face, no hope, only a quiet, cold fire. The kind that does not roar. It waits. Jesse set down the sack of flour in his hand, let the rope fall beside it. Then he reached inside his coat. He pulled out a pouch, opened it slowly. Inside were $4 silver. His last. He poured them into his palm, stepped forward. 4.5. Someone shouted. Laughter broke out. The auctioneer smirked. "Price is 5. Do you have 5? Mr. Jesse did not answer. From behind him, a man stepped forward. Older, tall, wore a worn badge and a look of quiet warning. It was Marshal Thomas Bridger. He said nothing, just placed a single coin in Jesse's hand, then stepped back. Jesse nodded, lifted the 5 coins, let them catch the light. The auctioneer hesitated, then shrugged, sold. The crowd did not cheer. They did not need to. Their looks said enough. Jesse turned toward the cage. He knelt beside it, did not touch the bars. Instead, he took off his coat, folded it once, laid it gently across the top, shielding her from the sun. Then, softly, he spoke. "My name is Jesse. I am not here to hurt you." The girl did not reply. The deputy stepped forward, unlocked the cage. The door creaked open. Jesse stood, took 2 steps back. She did not move. The silence stretched. Then, slowly, she shifted, not with fear, with caution. Her knees shook. She steadied herself with one hand on the cage wall. Then, barefoot and bruised, she stepped out. Nobody clapped. Nobody spoke. Jesse turned and walked away. No command, no promise. And after a pause, she followed. 1 step, then another. Out the warehouse, into the sun, through the heat and dust. They walked side by side. No words passed between them. Only the crunch of gravel. Only the eyes of the town watching. At the edge of Dead River, Jesse stopped beside his mare. He turned. "I do not own you," he said. "You can go if you want." She said nothing. Then she looked at the saddle, looked at him, and climbed up. She did not ask where they were going. He did not offer. He mounted behind her, and together they rode out of Dead River, toward a place neither of them could yet name. That was the choice. Not a rescue, not a trade. Just 2 strangers walking away from the fire, not holding hands, but choosing the same direction. The land beyond Dead River stretched dry and wide. No fences, no signs, only mesquite, dust. And the kind of silence that made a man hear his own regrets too clearly. Jesse Calder rode ahead, guiding the mare along a narrow trail that curved between patches of thorn brush. Behind him, Ayasha sat straight. She had not spoken since the cage. He had not asked her to. The sun dropped low, turning the horizon to fire. Shadows lengthened. They reached a shallow ravine lined with cottonwoods and stopped. Jesse dismounted, loosened the saddle. Ayasha climbed down without a word. He led the mare to water. She knelt by a flat rock and unwrapped a small cloth bundle from the saddlebag. Bread, dried meat, a pinch of salt. He placed it nearby, then stepped back. Ayasha watched him. Then ate, each bite, slow, measured. The wind shifted. Smoke. Jesse turned, narrowed his eyes. Far behind them, beyond the hills, a faint glow. He did not speak, but his jaw tightened. He knew that glow. He had seen it before. When the barn burned, back in the year Anna died, he walked a few steps uphill, scanned the horizon again. The smoke curled steady now. Not a wildfire, a house. His house. His voice was low when he spoke. They burned it. Ayasha did not look up. She said, "They want you to come back angry." He nodded, sat on a rock near the fire pit, and began stacking kindling. She helped. Their hands never touched. But the movement had rhythm. It was quiet, intentional. That night, under starlight, they did not speak much, but Jesse found himself watching her hands. Scarred, quick, precise. She moved like someone who had learned long ago not to waste time or motion, someone who had buried things and lived anyway. Just before dawn, a sound broke the silence. Hoofbeats, far off, dull. Repeating, Ayasha stood first, eyes sharp. Jesse followed, grabbing his rifle. They listened, then the hoofbeats faded, but the message was clear. They were being watched. The next day, they rode hard. Jesse did not know where they were headed, but his hands held the reins like a man holding more than leather. He was holding a choice he could not name. Ayasha scanned the ridges. Every movement in the brush drew her eyes. She said little, but when she did, it mattered. At midday, she pointed to a ridge. "Someone is watching us from there." Jesse nodded. They kept moving. By nightfall, they reached an old line shack near a dry riverbed. One wall had caved in, but the roof held. Jesse lit a lantern. Ayasha checked the corners. They stayed one night. He slept near the door. She took the far side, in between, a rifle. Neither one said it, but both knew. Safety was still a question. The following morning, Jesse stood by the edge of the riverbed, staring at a long piece of twisted iron. It was part of his branding rod. Scorched, bent. Ayasha stepped beside him. She looked at it, then looked at him. "You could go back," she said. "Say you made a mistake. Say you gave me up." He did not answer right away. Then he said, "I buried my son under a cottonwood tree. His name was Caleb. I built the cross with that same rod." He looked at the sky. "I do not give up." Ayasha said nothing, but something in her face changed. Not warmth, not trust, but the barest shade of recognition. She turned, walked back toward the shack, and Jesse, for the first time in years, let the silence settle in his chest, not like a weight, but like a kind of peace. The sky turned darker that evening, not from clouds, but from the weight that settled behind Jesse Calder's ribs. He stood near the mouth of the canyon, watching the horizon fade into smoke-blue dusk. Ayasha knelt beside the horse, checking the hooves for stones. Her movements were quick, efficient, quiet. There was a sound in the distance, sharp, thin, like a whip cracked against open space. Jesse turned his head, listened. It came again. He stepped closer to the edge of the bluff and scanned the valley below. Dust, riders, 4, maybe 5, moving slow, deliberate, too far to see faces, but they were not out for a stroll. "They are following," Ayasha said behind him. Not a question. Jesse nodded once. "Yes." They packed fast. No fire, no rest, just hooves on dry rock, and breath held tight in their throats. The desert stretched out wide, but there were not many places to hide. The full moon was rising, bright enough to paint shadows, too bright to vanish in. They moved east, following a dry creek bed lined with brittle brush and dark sand. The wind shifted, and Jesse could feel it again. That pull. The question, what was he doing? What kind of man takes a woman hunted by men with badges, torches, and hate and just keeps riding? He had a choice. He could leave her, slip away in the night, go to another town, start again, live out his days with no more fires, no more bullets. He could forget her. But the truth sank deep into his gut. He had already chosen. They stopped near a bluff just before midnight. The trail narrowed, twisted around slabs of sandstone. Ayasha climbed down, eyes sharp in the moonlight. She touched his arm. We should not stop. Jesse looked at her. He saw the sweat on her brow. The dust streaked across her cheek. He saw the fire that had not faded, but he also saw the tremble in her shoulders. Even wolves need sleep, he said. She looked away. He added, you are not running alone anymore. The cave they found was shallow, but dry. Jesse tied the mare inside the narrow alcove. Ayasha sat near the entrance, a rock in one hand, her knife in the other. Jesse sat across from her, not too close. He watched the opening, watched the night breathe. Time passed slow. Finally, Ayasha spoke. Do you regret it? Jesse looked at her. No. She blinked. I would not have blamed you. He shook his head. That is the problem. She tilted her head. What is, he answered slowly. That we expect men to leave. The words hung there. Then she said, most do. Jesse stared at the ground. I did once. I left my wife dying because the town called for help. I left my son crying because I believed duty came first. I came back too late both times. He swallowed. I will not do that again. Ayasha's voice softened, just enough to notice. You are not who they say you are. Jesse looked at her, and for the first time, she held his gaze longer than a moment. Not defiance, not fear, just clarity. No, he said, I am not. They rested for 2 hours, then rode again. By morning, they reached the edge of a dry, salt flat. Jesse stopped the horse, looked out over the open stretch, no trees, no cover, but no choice. Behind them, the dust rose again, closer now. Ayasha said nothing. She only reached into the saddlebag, pulled out the rifle, checked the chamber. Jesse nodded. They would not run forever, but not today. Today, they would keep moving. And whatever happened next, they would face it together. By midday, the heat came down like a hammer. Jesse Calder wiped his brow with the back of his sleeve. Dust clung to his skin. The trail beneath the horse's hooves was no longer clear, just cracked stone and dry bones. Ayasha rode behind him, silent. They had crossed the salt flats and followed the canyon wall east. Jesse knew these paths, or thought he did, but something felt off, too quiet, too still. He pulled the mare to a stop. Ayasha dismounted, walked ahead, eyes sharp. She crouched near a bend in the trail, ran her fingers across the dirt, fresh tracks. Jesse stepped beside her, looked down. She pointed to a boot print half hidden near the rocks. They waited here. He nodded. It was a trap. They turned too late. Shouts echoed from the ridge above. 6 riders, guns drawn, faces wrapped in cloth. But Jesse recognized one. Wade Kinley, deputy of Dead River, now turned to vigilante. Hand her over, he called. Save yourself some trouble. Ayasha raised the rifle, stepped slightly in front of Jesse. He did not stop her. Wade laughed. Really? Calder. You protecting her now? She is not your kind. Jesse called back. She is not yours either. That made Wade frown. He raised his hand. A shot rang out. Missed. Ayasha dropped to one knee. Fired once. One of the riders fell sideways. Not dead, but stunned. The rest scattered, but they did not run. They regrouped. The fight had begun. Jesse moved behind a rock slab. Ayasha took position just above him. They fired in turns, measured, controlled. Jesse counted 6 bullets, then 5, then 3, then none. The canyon turned hot and loud. Jesse reloaded fast. Ayasha breathed hard. Sweat ran down her jaw. Then silence. Too sudden. Jesse peered around the edge. No one there. Then a voice. Not Wade. Older. Enough. Jesse turned. From behind the ridge came 3 horses. The man leading them wore no badge, but carried a book. Leather-bound. Worn. Next to him, a second rider. Same coat, same badge. And in between them, Marshal Thomas Bridger, still alive, still calm. His voice echoed, "You're trespassing on federal land." Wade cursed. "That law does not reach this far." Thomas raised a piece of paper. "It does now." He turned to the rider beside him. "This is Alan Reese, Civil Rights Court of El Paso. He has the authority to charge anyone who interferes with the liberty of a citizen." Alan spoke next. "Firm? You try to take her. That is conspiracy, federal time." The riders behind Wade looked at each other, shifted in their saddles. Fear smells different than hate, quieter, sharper. Wade spat. "You got no proof she is a citizen." Thomas nodded toward Jesse. "He has the paper." Jesse pulled out the crumpled document, held it high, then tore it clean in 2. "Paper does not own her," he said. "She is free because she chose to be." Alan smiled. "That will do." Wade snarled, reached for his gun. Ayasha stepped forward. "I would not," she said. Her voice was steady. He hesitated, then turned his horse. "This is not over." Thomas replied, "No, it is just beginning." That night, Jesse and Ayasha camped beneath a mesquite tree near a dry stream. Neither spoke for a while. Then Jesse said, "You had a clean shot at him." Ayasha looked into the fire. "I did. Why not take it?" she answered slowly. "Because that would have made me like him?" Jesse nodded. Then he said something he had not said in years. "Thank you." She glanced at him. Just once. Then looked back at the fire. The fire crackled soft beneath the open night. Jesse Calder sat with his legs stretched out. His rifle lay beside him, unloaded, oiled, clean. Not because he expected trouble, but because he needed something to do with his hands. Across the flames, Ayasha stirred the pot, stew bubbled low. She moved slowly, with the kind of quiet that comes from tired bones and a heavy heart. They had not spoken since Wade Kinley had turned back. Not about the law, not about the torn paper, not about the choice Jesse made. But it lived between them, like breath, like memory. Jesse leaned forward, reached into his coat. From the inside pocket, he pulled out a folded piece of parchment, the deed, still unsigned, still blank. He held it a moment, stared at it, then stood. Ayasha turned as he walked over. He placed the paper on the small table she had built weeks ago from scrap wood and saddle nails. Beside it, he laid a pen. Next to that, a box. Small, metal, old. Ayasha looked up at him. "What is this?" Jesse folded his arms. "It is the ranch," he said. "The livestock, the tools, the name carved on the barn door." She stared. To what he answered, "To you." Silence. Even the wind seemed to pause. Her hands tightened around the wooden spoon. Why? He looked down once, then met her eyes. Because it is yours, he said. Because you made it something worth keeping. And because I was just waiting to die before you walked through my story. Ayasha stood. Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. I did not ask for this. Jesse nodded. You did not have to. He pushed the paper forward. This is not a gift. It is not mercy. It is not payment. He looked at her. It is truth. She stepped closer, looked at the paper, then at him. And slowly, her fingers touched it. Not to sign, not yet. Just to feel like it was real. Then she said, I was a warrior before they put me in a cage. I had no land, no title, just my hands and my name. They took one, but not the other. Jesse listened. She continued, I do not know what this place is yet, but it does not feel like a cage. He smiled, just a little. Then stay. Later that night, after the fire died low and the horses settled near the fence, Jesse sat alone on the porch. The stars above were sharp, cold, endless. Ayasha joined him. She wore the shawl from the old trader, her boots scuffed, worn from weeks of labor. She did not speak at first. Then, softly. Why did you tear the paper? Jesse answered slow. Because owning someone should never feel like justice, not even on paper. She nodded, then said, They still look at me like I do not belong. He looked at her. And what do you see when you look back? She thought a moment. I see fear, not of me, of something they buried long ago. I remind them. Jesse let the words settle. Then he reached into the metal box he had placed on the table earlier. From inside, he pulled a piece of candy, wrapped, slightly melted at the edge. A caramel, he said. Ayasha raised an eyebrow. My mother used to give me one when the world felt too heavy, he said. Said it would not fix anything, but it would help me wait until it did. He held it out. She took it, unwrapped it slow, placed it on her tongue. Her eyes closed, not from sweetness, but from memory. Then, without a word, she leaned back against the porch post, close, but not touching. And Jesse sat beside her, not asking for more, just staying still, together. The days turned longer. The wind carried less dust. More birds came with the mornings. And for the first time in many years, the sound of children's laughter returned to the land that Jesse Calder once thought would bury him. It started small. Ayasha planted seeds behind the barn, tomatoes, beans. Wildflowers she found growing along the ridge. She watered them early, spoke to them in Apache. At first, Jesse only watched. Then he brought her a rusted watering can from the attic. It leaked. She patched it with wax and twine. They worked together, side by side. Ayasha wrote her name on the barn door. Not big, not carved, just chalk, just enough. She scrubbed the walls, mended the windows, painted the kitchen white. She taught Jesse how to say a prayer in her mother tongue. He showed her how to balance the books. In the evenings, she read. Jesse had saved Anna's old Bible, not for the verses, but for the blank pages at the back. Ayasha filled them, not with scripture, with lists, with stories, with words she remembered from childhood, and those she learned fresh with ink. Twice a week, she rode to a camp near Bear Ridge. Apache families had gathered there, most too cautious to return to any town. But their children came running when Ayasha arrived. She brought chalkboards, stories, a small tin of hard candy. They called her teacher. She never asked them to. They just knew, one afternoon. As the sun dipped low, Jesse sat on the porch with his boots off and his hat over his eyes. Ayasha stepped outside, held out a folded slip of paper. He opened it. Inside was a rough drawing, a child's hand, a crooked cabin, a woman in a shawl, and under it, the word home. Jesse swallowed. His voice came thick. They see it too. Ayasha nodded. Not because of walls, but because no one tries to tear them down here. The town had not forgotten. Dead River still stared when they rode in for flour or sugar. Some faces turned away. Some looked too long, but others changed. Mrs. Hallie, the baker, began leaving jam jars near the fence. Young Pete Dillard offered to fix the fence post after a storm, without being asked. One day, a girl at the mercantile slipped Ayasha a folded ribbon. Blue, faded. It said teacher in shaky pencil. Ayasha did not smile often, but that day, she did. Jesse saw it from the window and felt the weight shift in his chest again. They did not speak much of the past, but sometimes, around the fire, it surfaced. Ayasha told stories of her sister, lost to fever, of the night her village burned, of the one soldier who looked away instead of pulling the trigger. Jesse listened. He did not speak often, but one night, he said, "I do not want you to be grateful." She blinked. "I am not." He smiled. "Good," then added, "I just want you to know that someone sees you. That is enough for me." Ayasha stirred the fire. "It was never about being seen," she said. Then what he asked? She looked up. "It is about being believed." That fall, the garden bloomed. The barn held hay again. The walls no longer echoed. Children came for lessons. Neighbors came for eggs. And Jesse Calder, the ghost of Dead River, became the man who stood quietly beside a woman who had once walked out of a cage. Not to be saved, but to build something only she could imagine. Spring came soft, not like a storm, not with thunder or flood, but gentle, like something earned. The yucca bloomed along the hillsides, white petals opening slow against the breeze. Jesse Calder stood barefoot in the garden, the same garden Ayasha had planted months earlier. He held a small bouquet of wildflowers, rough around the edges, bright at the center. He was not a man who made speeches, but today, he had something to say, even if only in silence. Ayasha stepped out from the house. She wore a green dress. Cotton, simple, hand-stitched. The children had helped with the beads. One crooked line ran near her shoulder. She left it that way. Her hair was braided down her back, her hands empty. She walked slow, each step steady. No music, no preacher, only the wind. And a line of children, holding blossoms. Jesse met her under the wooden arbor he had built from fence posts. She stopped, looked up at him. He grinned. "Hello, Mrs. Calder." She raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure?" He nodded once. "I have never been more." She reached for his hand, held it, not tight, not trembling, just enough. No one clapped. No one read vows. But when their hands joined, something settled in the air, like two pieces of land finally joining after years of drought. The neighbors who came brought food, not gifts, a pie, a jar of beans, a blanket stitched with blue stars. Marshal Thomas Bridger arrived near sundown. He did not speak much, just tipped his hat, watched from the gate. Ayasha handed him a plate. He ate in silence, then placed a feather on the porch step before leaving. No one asked why, but Jesse understood. Later that evening, the porch light flickered. The sky turned to lavender and coal. Jesse and Ayasha sat in the same chairs where they had watched the garden grow. Now, they watched the horizon fade. He leaned back, I thought I would die here, alone. She looked at him. I thought I would never see open sky again. He nodded. Funny thing, he said, what I did not save you. She smiled, not big, but true. I know. Then added, but you saw me. That was enough. Jesse exhaled. Not because he was tired, because, for the first time in years, he felt full. They did not speak of forever, only of tomorrow, of fence posts, of seedlings, of the kind of peace that does not need to be loud to be real. Inside the house, the fire burned low. The deed still hung on the wall. Signed, not as ownership, but as acknowledgement. Beside it, a ribbon. Faded blue, still said teacher, and beside that, a chalkboard with the word home that night, under a sky full of stars. Jesse reached for her hand again. No promise, no demand. Just a quiet choice, again, and Ayasha chose him back. The wind that evening was soft. It carried the smell of dry grass, warm soil, and wood smoke. Nothing bitter, nothing urgent, just peace. Jesse Calder stood behind the house, his boots planted firm in the dirt, in his hand a folded slip of paper, old, yellowed, frayed at the corners, the last trace of what had once brought her into his life. A bill of sale, $5, one name, misspelled, slanted. It had never belonged on paper. He stared at it for a moment longer, then held it to the flame. At first, it curled, refused to catch, as if even the paper knew it was not meant to be burned, but then it flared, bright, sudden, turned black, then ash. The ember lifted into the air, caught the breeze, and vanished west. Inside the house, Ayasha was shelling peas near the window. She looked up as he entered, saw the soot on his fingers, said nothing, just nodded. Some things do not need words. That night, Jesse opened the old ledger, the one that once held debts, seed counts, rainfall tallies. He turned past the numbers, past the entries, to a blank page, and began to write. I did not buy her. I gave up $5 and got back something I did not know I had lost. She was never mine, but she chose to stay. And in that, I found the only kind of freedom that matters. Not from war, not from loss, but from the silence I carried inside me. She taught me that a heart can still learn, that kindness is not weakness, and that sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest truths. He closed the book, set it beside the lamp, then stepped outside. Ayasha was already on the porch, wrapped in her shawl, bare feet resting on the rail. She looked up. Finished writing. He nodded. Did it help? He shrugged. I do not know, but it felt honest. She smiled. That is enough. They sat together in silence, not the kind that hurts, the kind that heals. Below them, the wheat swayed gentle in the breeze. The chickens had settled, the horses quiet, and the porch light glowed gold across the floorboards. A week later, Jesse made a quiet trip into town. He came back with a parcel wrapped in brown paper, placed it on the table. For you, he said. Ayasha opened it. Inside, a dress, deep green, beaded by hand, simple, but beautiful. Her fingers stilled. She looked at him. I thought we were done with gifts. He shook his head. This is not a gift. It is a reminder of what he said, that you do not need to earn beauty. They danced that night. No music, just the creak of the floor, the sound of soft laughter, and the steady beat of hearts remembering how to move. And when the world outside kept turning, when stories of war and loss echoed far beyond their fence lines, inside that quiet home, a woman who had once been caged and a man who had once been buried in silence chose to love without rescue, without noise, without need, just love. If this story stirred something in your chest, if you felt the wind move through Dead River, if you heard the crackle of fire under stars, if you saw yourself in a man too quiet to be heard, or in a woman too proud to be broken, then maybe, just maybe, you know this is not only fiction. Maybe you know someone who lived it. Maybe you have lived it yourself. At Wild West Echoes, we do not just tell stories of the frontier. We tell stories of healing, of quiet defiance, of hearts that found a way back to each other, not through violence, but through choosing again and again to stay. Join us, subscribe, share, sit by our campfire. And remember, in a world where everything could be taken, kindness is still worth giving, and love is always worth staying for. Some stories do not end with victory. They end with peace. This one reminds us that healing does not always come with big moments. Sometimes it begins with silence, with a hand offered without demand, with the courage to stay when walking away would be easier. Jesse did not save Ayasha, he saw her, and that was the beginning. In a world where people are judged before they speak, where wounds are carried quietly behind tired eyes, this story shows us the power of choosing kindness over control, respect over rescue. It teaches us that love, when given freely, can mend more than bones. It can rebuild trust. It can give someone their name back. So, if you are holding pain or walking beside someone who is, do not rush to fix, just stay. Sometimes, being seen is the first step home. Thank you for spending time with this story. If it touched your heart, if it made you pause, please consider giving it a like, sharing it with someone you care about, and subscribing to our channel. Here at Wild West Echoes, we bring forgotten stories back to life, stories of quiet strength, of healing, of love that grows from dust. Your support helps these voices ride a little farther. Until next time, stay kind, stay listening, and stay close to the fire.